I was half a block from my driveway when a golf cart with flashing yellow lights jerked to a stop in front of my truck. "Turn around," yelled a voice before I even had time to put it in park. It was Dolores. Of course it was Dolores. President of the Oak Ridge Pines Homeowners Association and self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac. She had her usual clipboard, oversized sunglasses, and a walkie-talkie like she was commanding a military unit. "I live here," I said, leaning out my window. "What are you doing? This road is HOA property. You didn't submit the proper form for re-entry." "Re-entry?" I blinked. "I went to pick up my kid from school, not storm Area 51. Dolores stepped closer, flanked by two guys in cheap security uniforms. One of them had a laminated badge that said HOA Enforcement Unit. They looked like they were hired off a Craigslist ad for men who look intimidating but have zero authority. "You left the neighborhood without notifying us. That's a violation of Article 8, Section 3. "Suspicious activity," Dolores snapped. "You can't be serious," I said. "I am, and until this is sorted, you'll need to wait outside HOA boundaries." I laughed. Couldn't help it. "Lady, I've lived in this house for 12 years. My name is on the deed." "You don't own the street." Dolores raised her chin like she'd just been challenged to a duel. "Actually, the HOA maintains all road access within Oak Ridge Pines." "Maintains, maybe. Owns, no," she waved at the guards. "Turn him around." The taller one stepped toward my truck. That's when I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Touch my vehicle and you'll be explaining to the sheriff why you're impersonating law enforcement," I said, keeping my tone calm. "You don't have the authority to block access to a public road." "This is private property," Dolores screeched. "No," I said, pointing to the faded street sign behind her. "County road. I checked the plat map when you tried to fine me last year for parking my trailer in my own driveway." She froze. That hit a nerve. I leaned out my window again. "You remember, don't you? When I showed up to the HOA meeting with a copy of the zoning documents, you had to refund everyone's parking fines after that." She didn't respond. Instead, she snapped her fingers at the guards, who looked less confident now. I put the truck in drive. "You move, I call the cops," she threatened. "Do it," I said. "I'll wait right here and explain to them how your HOA just tried to use fake security to block a homeowner from entering his own property." Dolores's face turned red enough to match her lipstick, but I wasn't done yet. I had a plan, and I knew exactly how to end this power trip once and for all. The next morning, I was on the phone with the county land records office before Dolores had time to finish her first cup of coffee. The clerk, a woman named Janice with a sharp voice and a sharper memory, pulled up the original subdivision deed faster than I expected. "Yep," she said, tapping her keyboard loud enough for it to echo through the line. "Oak Ridge Pines has road maintenance obligations, but the county retained ownership of the streets. That includes enforcement jurisdiction. Can you send me a copy of that?" "Certified? Already in your inbox," she said and hung up. I printed it. Twice. One for my records, one for what I had planned next. By noon, I'd filed a formal complaint with the sheriff's department for attempted impersonation of law enforcement. I included the footage from my dash cam, which had captured the whole confrontation, including the fake badge and Dolores's very clear claim that I couldn't access my own home. Detective Warren called me back before the end of the day. He was one of those guys who didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Langley, we reviewed your footage. That's not just an HOA overstepping, that's bordering on unlawful detainment. They tried to physically block me from my property," I said. "And they've got no legal right to control the road. I've got the deed to prove it." I saw. "We're opening an investigation. Those two rent-a-cops aren't licensed. One of them has a prior conviction for impersonating a public official." That got my attention. "Dolores hired them to intimidate residents," I said. "She's been escalating. This isn't a one-off. You think she's using HOA funds to pay them? Wouldn't surprise me. She's been refusing to release the budget to residents." Warren exhaled through his nose like a man who'd seen this play out too many times. I'll get a search warrant for the HOA's financial records. If she's misappropriating funds, that's felony embezzlement under state law. I didn't respond right away. I was thinking back to the last HOA meeting when Dolores refused to answer questions about the new security initiative she'd pushed through without a vote. "Let me know if you need statements from neighbors," I said. "I'm not the only one she's targeted," Warren chuckled. "Oh, I already got 2 people calling in after they saw your video online." I paused. "Wait, what video? You didn't post it?" "No." "Well, someone did. It's making the rounds." Title says, HOA president tries to block veteran from his own home. You a veteran? Army Reserve. 12 years. "That'll play well with a jury," he said and hung up. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. I arrived early, wearing a button-down instead of my usual work shirt. Not to impress anyone, just to look calm when things got loud. The clubhouse was packed. Word had spread fast. Dolores sat at the front table, flanked by the treasurer and secretary, both of whom looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. Her clipboard was gone. That was new. She didn't look up when I walked in, but she knew I was there. Her jaw tightened. I took a seat near the back, next to a guy I'd only spoken to once before, Frank, a retired machinist who always kept to himself. "You see the video?" he asked. "Didn't post it, but yeah, I saw it." Frank chuckled. "Never thought I'd be glad to own a house with a Ring camera. Got footage from 2 angles. Sent it to the sheriff's office yesterday." Before I could respond, Dolores banged the gavel. "This meeting will come to order." Nobody quieted down. In fact, the noise level rose. "Where's the budget report?" someone shouted. "We're not discussing finances tonight," Dolores said, voice sharp. "You haven't released one in over a year," another neighbor yelled. "I said we're not. You don't get to say anymore," I said, standing. "Not when you've used HOA money to hire fake security guards who threaten residents on public roads." That shut her up. I walked to the front and placed a copy of the county plat map on the table. Right next to it, I dropped the notice from the sheriff's office confirming an open investigation into unauthorized law enforcement activity and potential misappropriation of HOA funds. You don't own the road. You never did. And using association money without a vote, that's financial misconduct. Possibly criminal. She reached for the documents, but I slid them just out of reach. "You'll want to wait until the sheriff finishes his audit," I said. "They'll be coming by for the HOA's financial records. You kept those, right?" Her hand shook slightly. "I moved to suspend President Dolores pending legal review," someone called from the back. "I second the motion," Frank said. "All in favor?" I asked, turning toward the crowd. The room erupted. Hands shot up. Over 3 dozen, easily. Dolores stood abruptly. "This is not a recognized vote." "I am still the elected, not anymore," I interrupted. "The bylaws allow for emergency suspension if there's evidence of misconduct, and there is." The treasurer slowly stood and stepped away from Dolores. "I agree with the suspension," she said quietly. "I don't want to be part of this anymore." Dolores stared at her, stunned. The secretary followed suit a second later. "I'll be contacting our attorney," Dolores hissed. "Please do," I said. "They're going to need one." The next morning, I got a call from Detective Warren. They'd executed a search warrant on the HOA office. Turns out, Dolores had been paying the security team in cash withdrawals under a line item labeled infrastructure maintenance. Over $28,000 missing and no receipts. They also found a burner phone with dozens of threatening messages to residents who'd opposed her in the past. The charges came down fast: misuse of HOA funds, unauthorized security operations, and conspiracy to intimidate community members. The 2 fake guards were arrested the same day and charged with impersonating law enforcement and attempted unlawful detainment. It hit the local news by the weekend. Channel 7 ran a story titled "HOA Tyrant Taken Down by Homeowner with a Dash Cam." They interviewed Frank. He wore his old machinist uniform and gave Dolores a new nickname on live TV: Clipboard Napoleon. The rest of the board dissolved by the following Tuesday. I helped organize a special election with the county's assistance. We rewrote the bylaws to require quarterly financial disclosures, mandatory resident votes for any security initiative, and public access to meeting minutes within 72 hours. Nobody's tried to block a driveway since. And Dolores, last I heard, she took a plea deal. 5 years probation, restitution, and a ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. You can still see her old golf cart, though. Someone parked it at the entrance to Oak Ridge Pines and nailed a sign to it. It reads, "Beware the road is watching." A week after the special election, I was standing in the community garden, replacing a busted irrigation valve, when a black SUV with government plates rolled into the cul-de-sac. It wasn't the sheriff this time. 2 men in suits stepped out, one with a briefcase and the other with a small tablet. They didn't knock on doors, they walked straight to the former HOA office, which was now locked up and sealed with red tape. I took off my gloves and walked over, wiping sweat from my brow. "You gentlemen with the sheriff's office?" I asked. The taller one looked up from his tablet. "No, sir. Office of the State Inspector General. You're Mr. Langley, right?" "Yeah. We're following up on recent developments in Oak Ridge Pines." "May we ask you a few questions?" "Sure," I said, stepping aside. The shorter one opened his briefcase, pulled out a document with a gold seal, and showed me a letter of authorization. "We received a referral from the county auditor. There's evidence this HOA may have been operating a fraudulent security contracting scheme tied to a larger network of illegal firms statewide." I blinked. "Wait, you're saying Dolores was part of something bigger, possibly?" The same fake security outfit was listed under 6 different names across 3 counties. "We believe it's a shell operation funneling HOA dues into private accounts. Your HOA might have been the testing ground." I let that sink in. So this wasn't just her being on a power trip. Not entirely. She may have started that way, but the financial flow suggests something more coordinated. "Do you know if any other board members were aware?" They didn't act like it, but I wouldn't bet on their innocence either. "One of them handled the books without ever releasing records." The taller agent tapped something on his screen. "We'll need a list of all current and former officers, access to any minutes or digital records you've recovered, and any resident testimonies you can help us gather." "I can pull that together," I said. "People are still pretty fired up." "They'll talk." Before they left, they handed me a contact card and a sealed envelope. Inside was a subpoena, my name listed as a key witness. That night, I hosted a gathering at the community center. Not a formal meeting, just coffee, cookies, and an open mic. Word had gotten around about the state investigation, and neighbors were eager to speak. Some were angry, some were scared. All of them had stories. Elaine, a retired nurse, said she'd been pressured into paying a fine for unauthorized holiday decor after a wreath appeared on her door, one she never even hung. She'd asked for proof, and instead received 3 letters threatening lien action. She had kept every single one. Then there was Tom, whose teenage son had been followed home by one of the fake guards for loitering near the tennis court. They'd taken a photo of his license plate. That was enough to get everyone in the room dead silent. "I thought they were legit," Tom said. "They had radios, uniforms, even a marked vehicle. I didn't know they weren't licensed until the sheriff called." I stood up once he finished. "We're building a case. The state's involved now. If you have documentation, if you've got emails, letters, photos, bring them forward. These folks aren't just bullies. They're part of something organized." By the end of the night, I had a cardboard box full of evidence and 12 signed witness statements. The next morning, I dropped it off at the county prosecutor's office. They'd already opened a dedicated case file. It wasn't just about HOA misconduct anymore. They were investigating racketeering, wire fraud, and unlawful surveillance. 3 days later, subpoenas were issued for the treasurer and the former secretary. The secretary skipped town. The treasurer didn't. He was arrested at a gas station just outside town, trying to withdraw what was left of the HOA's rainy day fund from a joint account he'd never disclosed. Turns out, the money trail went back almost 3 years. Small monthly transfers to a company called Civic Shield Solutions, a name that sounded like a legitimate neighborhood patrol contractor. Only, Civic Shield didn't exist anywhere in the state business registry. It was a shell. The bank account led to a P.O. box in another county and a dummy LLC tied to a man named Gerald Pike. The name didn't mean anything to me, but when the prosecutor called to follow up, she filled in the blanks. Pike's been under federal investigation for setting up phony security companies, she said. He targets HOAs with overreaching boards, offers low-cost enforcement, and siphons money through fake invoices. Dolores was either complicit or being manipulated. So far, it looks like she authorized every payment. I had to sit down after that. Are we looking at federal charges? I asked. Very likely. Once we complete our review, we're forwarding the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office. This goes well beyond county lines. A week later, it hit the news again. This time, the headline read, "Fake security ring busted in multi-county sting HOA president at center of scandal." They used a photo of Dolores from a holiday newsletter, the kind where she'd always insisted on standing front and center, wearing a sash that read "Community First." Funny how that aged. With the entire board either arrested or under investigation, the HOA was officially dissolved under emergency provisions in the bylaws. The county stepped in temporarily to manage communal funds and maintenance, while residents voted on whether to restructure or go independent. The vote was unanimous. We chose to dissolve permanently. It was a process. But once the legal dust settled, we were free of HOA control entirely. We reclassified as a voluntary neighborhood association with no enforcement powers and no dues. Just community events, newsletters, and a shared calendar for lawn maintenance reminders. The roads, officially declared public by the county. Maintenance was folded into municipal responsibility. No more fines for parking your own car in your own driveway. As for Dolores, she pled guilty to multiple counts, including misappropriation of funds and conspiracy to defraud. She avoided prison due to a plea deal, but she was slapped with a massive restitution order and a lifetime ban from any fiduciary role in a homeowners organization. Her house went up for sale within a month. No one waved when the moving truck came. The SUV from the Inspector General's office came by one last time after the case closed. They gave me a formal letter of commendation and said our neighborhood's response would be used as a model for other communities dealing with rogue HOAs. I posted it on the bulletin board in the community center, right next to a sign-up sheet for a neighborhood cookout, Frank Grilled Ribs. Elaine brought her famous peach cobbler. Kids ran around without anyone in a uniform glaring at them. People parked wherever they wanted as long as they weren't blocking a hydrant, no clipboards, no fines. No more fake authority, just neighbors, finally in charge of their own neighborhood. 2 months after the last of the charges were filed, the county courthouse summoned me to testify in person. I'd already submitted everything. My dash cam footage, certified plat maps, sworn statements from over a dozen residents, and the financial records recovered during the investigation. But the judge wanted the details told clearly with a face to attach to them. I took the morning off work, wore a navy jacket that hadn't seen daylight since my brother's wedding, and sat on the wooden bench outside courtroom C, watching the bailiff unlock the double doors. The county prosecutor, a wiry woman named Harlan with a voice like gravel and a nose for blood in the water, nodded when she saw me. "They'll try to argue Dolores was misled," she said, flipping through her binder. "That she was duped by the fake security firm." "You ready for that?" "Absolutely," I said. "She wasn't duped. She gave them access codes to residents' backyard gates. I've got 3 neighbors who caught it on their own security feeds." Harlan didn't blink. "Let's put it on the record. By the time I took the stand, the courtroom was packed with reporters, city council observers, and at least a dozen Oak Ridge Pines homeowners. Dolores sat at the defense table, her shoulders tight and face drawn, her attorney whispering furiously in her ear. She didn't look like the woman who once used a megaphone to tell a neighbor to repaint his mailbox. She looked like someone very aware that her future was no longer hers to control. When Harlan called me forward, I stuck to the facts. I described the day I was blocked from my own driveway, the threats made by the so-called security guards, and Dolores's insistence that she had the right to control access to the road. I walked the court through the county's zoning maps, showed where the roads began and who had jurisdiction, and explained how Dolores had used her position to authorize payments to a non-existent company. Then Harlan handed me a page. It was a copy of a waiver Dolores had signed, one that gave Civic Shield permission to perform unmonitored surveillance operations within Oak Ridge Pines, including patrol routes, entry gate overrides, and resident contact enforcement. "You recognize this?" Harlan asked. "I do," I said. It was never disclosed to the community. It bypassed the usual approval process. Who signed it? Dolores, and only Dolores. Was this waiver ever approved by a majority vote of the HOA board? No. In fact, the treasurer told me later he hadn't even seen it until after the sheriff got involved. Harlan turned to the judge. No further questions. Dolores's attorney rose, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Langley, do you have any professional experience in municipal law?" "I'm not a lawyer," I said, "but I worked for the zoning department for 6 years before I moved here. I know how to read a plat map. And I know what a public right-of-way looks like." He hesitated, then nodded and sat back down. No cross-examination. When the next witness took the stand, it wasn't one of us. It was a county IT specialist who had pulled metadata from the HOA's cloud storage. He confirmed that the waiver had been uploaded from Dolores's home IP address, not the HOA office. Even more damning, she'd altered HOA meeting minutes to make it appear as though a vote had taken place. There was no such vote. The original files had been recovered from an automated backup. Then came the bombshell Harlan had been waiting to drop. "This court has heard testimony about unauthorized surveillance," she said. "We now present evidence that the so-called security team installed cameras without resident consent on 3 utility poles and 1 street lamp. These cameras were routed to a private server registered under a false business name. That server was located in Dolores's garage." The court gasped. Even the judge leaned forward. Harlan continued. "The footage includes backyard footage, interior views through windows, and in at least one case, audio of a private phone call conducted on a resident's back porch. These are clear violations of state privacy statutes and federal wiretap laws." That was it. The defense folded. Dolores's lawyer requested a recess, then didn't return for almost an hour. When they finally came back, he requested a plea deal. The judge agreed to hear sentencing the next day. She pled guilty to 8 counts: misuse of association funds, criminal surveillance, falsification of public records, conspiracy to defraud, and violation of state data privacy laws. The wiretap charge alone would have carried 15 years if she'd gone to trial. Instead, she got 5 years in a state facility, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The court ordered full restitution over $78,000. Her home, already under lien from the civil cases, was seized and sold to cover part of the damages. The rest would take years to repay. That night, the neighborhood gathered again, this time in celebration, not out of spite but relief. No podiums, no speeches. Just folding chairs, barbecued chicken, and a 6-foot banner that read, "No more watchdogs at the gate." Frank brought a hand-cranked ice cream maker. 2 families set up a projector to show an old Western on the clubhouse wall. It felt like a proper neighborhood again, one where people waved without suspicion and knocked on each other's doors just to say hello. A few weeks later, I got an official-looking envelope from the state inspector's office. Inside was a single sheet of paper, embossed and signed, a commendation for civic contribution and community leadership. I didn't frame it. I pinned it to the corkboard in my garage, next to the map of Oak Ridge Pines, no longer marked up with zoning exceptions or enforcement notes, just a map of a place where people lived, worked, and took care of each other. One afternoon, a young couple moving in down the street asked me where they could find the HOA office. I laughed and pointed to the old building, now converted into a tool-sharing shed and community library. "No HOA here," I said. "Just neighbors. We run things a little differently now." They smiled, a little surprised. "So who decides what we can and can't do?" "You do," I said, "with the rest of us. Just don't paint your house lime green and no one's going to bother you." They laughed and waved, and I walked home without checking over my shoulder. No clipboards or patrols in sight. Not because someone was watching, but because no one needed to anymore.